Hello and welcome to Deep in the D-Pad, where we explore all things gaming through an intellectual lens. I'm RK Taylor, and with me is Carlos Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone.
And we are discussing game fatigue today. What do we mean by game fatigue? What makes us feel fatigued when we're playing games? Those are the kinds of questions that we're going to be addressing today. But before we get into that, we're going to open with our D-Pad delights. So, Carlos, can you share with us something that delights you in gaming?
The Game Boy Advance SP, like that in general, that device will be my D-pad delight of the day. The Game Boy Advance SP, I don't remember what the SP even stood for, honestly. Like, that would be a great question to answer.
That's a good trivia question, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so this Game Boy Advance had a backlit screen. That was the most important feature for me, and I imagine a lot of other people who wanted to game at nighttime, because when there's no lights around, your Game Boy screen would just not work, right? You needed to have the little squiggly lined book light to go over your Game Boy in order to see what was going on in Pokemon or whatever.
Or sit directly under a lamp.
Exactly, yeah.
It's nighttime, you need as much lighting directly above you as possible.
So with the SP, they added this backlight function, and they had a nice design that I found really appealing, where it was just literally this clamshell. You just fold the whole console in half and then put it in your pocket and you're good to go. And it made this really nice square shape, which was kind of funny enough in line with the sort of GameCube product design philosophy of let's just make this square and super modular looking and compact. But the Game Boy Advance SP is a console that I played a lot, many games that I enjoyed on it, and I felt like featuring it as the delight because it was just such a good on-the-go console. Arguably, it's a better on-the-go console for me than the Switch is. And that might be somewhat due to circumstances and what point I am in my life versus where I was back when I had the Advance SP, but there was just something about it. The games were great without needing to graphically push super hard. The product itself was good. There was a good battery life to it. When you were done with it, you could fold it, put it away. If you wanted to play it in class, it was easy enough to flip it open a little bit, beep, boop, beep, beep, and then close it back up, as if you would your flip cell phone in that same era. And yeah, I mean, the big ones for me playing on the Game Boy Advance was the Mega Man Battle Network series. Actually, at one point, funny enough, we can do a little side story to this delight. I nearly lost my Game Boy Advance SP, but instead I ended up losing a few games for it. And, the storage isn't saved on the console, right? Not like we have with Switch, where it's saved to an SD card, or maybe there's a little internal storage, but all the save data was on the cart itself. So I'd gotten to the final boss of Mega Man 07 or something like that. And that's several hours of gameplay. Mega Man, very difficult game. So, lots of tries and stuff in there. And I got to the near end of it, it's the final boss rush where you just got to fight every boss back to back to back till you get to the final guy. And my dad is oh, hey, we got to go out, run some errands, something, something, something. And I had this Game Boy, protector case or whatever that would usually have a little knapsack for the games. And I put that on top of the car, and me in my tiny kid brain wisdom was so engaged with the game still that I sort of absentmindedly put the case with my other games on it on top of the car, hopped in the car as I was playing the game, and then we took off. Yeah. Oh, we took off. And at some point, and I realized it fairly quickly, it was only maybe a minute or less of driving, but I was oh no, my thing was on top of the car. And I got out the car, go to look for it, and it's oh shit, it's not on the car. We only went down this hill. Can we check the hill? And my dad was nice enough to drive us slowly back up the hill. Nobody was around. And we scanned for it and just ultimately could not find it. So I lost my Game Boy Advance SP case, travel case, and I lost 2 games with it, one of which I was at the very final section for, and that was just so such a burn, I guess. It was just like, why? Like, it definitely, that was one of those moments of like, I am going to learn from this. Why do we pick ourselves back up?
The lesson is never play games. They will only disappoint you.
They'll distract you from the greater things.
You're losing like the money value, which, as a kid, it's not like you have a ton, of capital to spend on games, and also all the progress. But going back to the actual like delightful portion of your delight, I think the SP is an underrated console. I completely agree with you. You hit on some good points. The clamshell was crazy because it was like the first time you were going to carry around a screen without it getting scratched. That was brilliant, And the backlight, the most important. But also it was backwards compatible, which was really nice. And it kind of gave rise to the like DS's clamshell model, but DS didn't have backwards compatible for Game Boy games. They had a Game Boy Advance slot, but they didn't have the Game Boy games that fit in there. So if you had a DS and let's assuming that you got all of the handheld models that were out at that time, right? You had to continue to play your SP if you wanted to play Game Boy games because your kind of DS boxed you out of that. So it was a console that you would keep around, even generations after it was gone, because it was like the last way that you were able to connect with these older games. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't get a lot of hype or attention. Like there's not like a lot of like nostalgia buzz. Not like I'm looking for that, not like I want people to be constantly talking about that, or like I want 10 articles about it. But in general, like it is, was it not successful? Do you know the situation there?
So the Game Boy Advance SP was fairly successful, it looks like. It sold 43.52 million units. Specifically the SP, which SP, sort of straightforwardly, it stands for special. That's what the SP stands for. Yeah, it's not like DS where it meant dual screen. It's just special.
Okay, so my delight is the Sopranos trivia game. We're actually kind of stepping outside the D-pad for this because this is a physical game that my lovely mother got me for Christmas this year. And it's a terrible game. It is absolute trash. It doesn't make any sense. They try to incorporate poker with like a standard trivia game, but it just doesn't work, and it's boring, and the mat is like felt and and like just everything about it feels unpolished, from the plastic chips.
That's a good way to put it, unpolished. Like when you look at a board game, definitely unpolished is like something you can notice immediately. There's like two levels of unpolished when it comes to like physical board games, right? You have the like, oh, here's the polish of like, do all the mechanics like work and feel good together? There are things thematically appropriate and connected? But then you have like the actual hardware polish, right? And when you say like the board was felt, like it was like somebody went to Hobby Lobby and like fucking stole a little bit of like material and went like chop 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 with their sewing scissors and was like, here you go, yeah, Tony and the boys, they're gonna answer questions to each other now. Like, I totally agree.
But the trivia questions are fun, and it is nice to have a deck of cards that we can go through and make Sopranos jokes, and so in a sense, I played the game once or twice so far. I think just once actually, but I guess that maybe that speaks to the game's quality. I don't know, or just like how many times do you really want to go around with your friends to do Sopranos trivia? But for for the friends that I have who do enjoy Sopranos, it's fun, and including you, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's just fun to go around and like the game is a conversation starter, not because of how good it is, but it's prompting you. It's trying to get you to show what you know and explore things with friends, and it's still a way of like kind of bringing people together, despite the fact that the board itself is bad and the mechanics, the idea for the gameplay is bad, right? But I think what we did in the situation was override the rule set. So we didn't get bogged down by the rules. I think initially we did, but soon we like liberated ourselves. And like once we realized that this rule set wasn't successful, that this wasn't going to be optimally fun, we created a game using the parts that they'd given us. We were like, how can we better this Sopranos trivia game? Right. And then we did that, right? And that was way more fun. We didn't, like, for example, right, just to take a really specific example, we didn't have a limit on the amount that you could bet, I think. And that automatically, like the way that we're distributing chips we're not beholden to the rule set anymore. We're kind of creating the Sopranos Prime trivia game. It's like, I don't know what else to say about that, but it was a good time. And I don't know if you ever feel like you're kind of bogged down by a rule set that you don't want to be, I would encourage you to step outside it and see, or like collaborate with the people that you're playing with and see if they're willing to step outside it too. You don't want to be like a totalitarian who's like, we're not playing Monopoly this way anymore, we're going backwards, but like you want to be able to engage with the thing you're playing and not just have it be like, you don't want to just be the consumer. If it's not serving you, you want to be able to mix things up and try to make them more fun, So for those of you listening, Carlson and I decided to do this episode because we watched a Donkey video where he critiques Horizon Forbidden West, and in his terms, he forbids you from playing Horizon Forbidden West. That intrigued me because it's generally a well-received game, but in his analysis, he's essentially comparing it to a bunch of other open-world games and talks about how the mechanics and style overall of the game have been recycled. They've been borrowed from other games. They've been replicated, essentially, right, or remade in ways that are not fully interesting to him, the ways that he thinks there's not enough novelty brought to the player, and he would expect that kind of novelty to be brought to the player. He wants you to have fun, experience something interesting or new or thought-provoking. And for him, it seemed as if he just got bored by the repetition and familiarity. And so that prompted us to want to talk about game fatigue in general. And that's kind of the general mood that we're trying to get at when we talk about fatigue. Let's get deeper into what fatigue is, though. Carlos, do you have specific, not just from your own experience, but from hearing other people talk about feeling fatigued or things that are related to fatigue? What strikes you as evidence that someone is feeling fatigued?
So we know fatigue in general to be this thing that is more of like a physical condition, right? Like, oh, I've been doing so much throughout the day, my body is just like extremely tired and I can't do much. Like, that's fatigue. If we look at it in like game mechanics, it's often like, oh shit, I ran out of stamina, I can't do certain moves because I'm fatigued, something like that, right? But when we play video games, it's often a more relaxed activity. Like, it's way more focused on like the mind and the sort of fingertips, hand-eye coordination, that type of thing. But we do reach a point where what we're playing is not entertaining us. And that's not to say, oh, this game is frustrating, it's not entertaining me. No, it's more so that you're not getting anything new or something that you feel is like of value or rewarding from it. And I think as that goes on, like the sense of fatigue, like gets greater. So specifically, to kind of put it into more like design terms, I feel like video game fatigue starts to come into play when the player is no longer receiving adequate novelty or reward for the actions they're putting in. And that action could simply be going out to the store, buying a game, and popping in the disc, right? And it's like, okay, well, I'm popping in Horizon Forbidden West after playing Uncharted 4, followed by Spider-Man on the PS4. And it's like, oh, I am now kind of like a little less excited on this game because what I played from the last two games, Uncharted and Spider-Man, surprisingly, a lot of that stuff is popping up here. So I'm not getting much new except for, oh, big dinosaur combat. Like, that's cool. But maybe that doesn't create novelty on that front as fast or as much as it needs to hold a 40 to 60 hour game.
Right. So it's lacking something essential that would otherwise satisfy you.
Yeah, it's definitely lacking something, and I mean, it's very different case by case, right? For some games, it could just be lacking an innovation. Like, maybe it does some things well, but nothing well enough to comment on, and it's not bringing in an innovation to actually speak on. Other games will pick a very specific thing, and even though it's tried and done, they will say, we are going to make this the best implementation of this thing that we have ever seen, and people are going to talk about our game because of this. And you seemingly need to have like an innovation or a best in class thing in order to like make a splash or have like a lasting impact on people after they play your game. And what we often see with higher budget games are decisions that are safer than reinventing the wheel or trying to innovate on something over and over and over again. Because again, so many things need to get made within that one big budget title. So many people are put to like small individual things within that big budget title. You can only like hedge your bets like so much. At least me personally, when I am experiencing game fatigue, what I sort of feel is like this active pressure, maybe malaise is a better word. Like there is some sort of like gloom happening in my mind and or my eyes when I'm playing a game that I'm like fatigued on. I'm not feeling super engaged and excited, but at the same time, it's not like offensive to me. So I'm not going like, ugh, whatever, this game, and then like trying to turn it off, right? It's hitting this like bad middle ground where I'm just like, like, I don't know, some sort of zombified playing it. Not even zombified, really. Like, that's probably not the best word, but it's like, I'm not playing this because it's fun and I want to keep playing it. If anything, I feel like I'm going through the motions. So it might be that like familiarity and that comfort food, but for my interactive mind is what keeps me going.
Yeah.
What about you? Like, how do you describe the sensation of game fatigue as you're playing? Is it like on the game as a whole, or is it with like just specific elements?
Yeah, I would agree with almost everything you said. I found that to be a really compelling characterization of what game fatigue feels like. The thing I want to highlight is that it's different than boredom, because boredom is something you feel like in a moment, you know, and game fatigue is something that you only feel across a bunch of moments of boredom, right? It is the sense for me of weaving together the pieces of boredom that I felt across different games and also, and perhaps more importantly, like within a specific game. If I'm doing the same thing over and over again in a specific game, or it's something that I've observed in other games, and I have this lack of satisfaction for what I'm doing, you know, the amount of effort that it takes to do something, and that could really just be measured in time. You know, if it takes me 15 seconds to do something and it seemed like it was really basic, or there was just nothing that impressed me there, then I start to feel like this kind of like anchor, like this game is like not serving me. It is, you know, it's dead weight essentially, right? It's like how I could be spending my time more effectively, but I'm not, because I'm continuing to play this game. The only thing that you said that I did not agree with is the comfort food aspect of it. And I think that that game itself that is fatiguing me is not a comfort food, but playing games itself is. So the activity of playing games is something that I can continue to go to, and generally I will feel like fulfillment or satisfaction from playing. So there's almost like a cognitive dissonance that's going on, where like I kind of have a lot of evidence that this particular game is not going to be successful, but because of my other evidence that gaming in general is something that serves me, it's almost, I feel like I'm almost getting my wires crossed, and I'm sitting on the couch in this like I feel a little stuck, you know. And the way that you described it, you know, you were saying you were struggling with the word zombified, trying to figure out if that was like exactly the right word. For me, it is kind of like an apathetic depression, almost like the gloom over the eyes was a really good image. It's very relatable, where you're like, you know, just kind of there's a sense of like paralysis almost, where you're like, I'm playing, but I don't want to be playing, but like I kind of do want to be playing. I don't know what else I would rather be doing. So you get into this kind of uncertainty, you know, this state where you're just like, well, this is the path of least resistance for me right now. I'm just going to continue and bowl ahead, hoping that eventually there's some return on my investment.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it that much more disappointing when oftentimes there isn't that return on investment. So a major part of combating game fatigue is knowing when to actually like put the game down. It's like avoiding getting trapped in that spider's web, or whatever you want to call it, that paralysis. Like when you start to feel it, it's probably worth it to put the game down and try a different activity, maybe even try a different game. I'm not sure sort of where do you draw the line between, oh, this is like the game's problem specifically, or like I've just been playing too many games, because you can reach like a holistic fatigue on video games in general. Like if you're just doing that as the only thing in your day-to-day activities with your free time, like at some point the ROI on your enjoyment or the rush you get from like beating something is going to dwindle. Granted, you have a lot of different flavors of video games that you can play at any given moment, but the act of like sitting down and, you know, doing the hand-eye coordination thing, it does eventually get like tiring or boring. So like you need something to spice up outside of the video game in order to make the video game be a little more appealing. But that doesn't excuse these games from like, you know, ripping such similar elements from so many different games that people have already like played before. That's like much more of a like factory line side of like why this thing happens. But for people who are like, hey, I really like video games, but I don't like when these games make me feel that like paralyzed feeling. Well, like go try a different game, or maybe do like a 10-minute yoga session, read a chapter of a book, and then come back and play the game. Maybe play a game of chess instead. Bust out the Sopranos trivia game if a video game is boring you, and then you're like, oh, well, this is actually really hard to understand, and I don't exactly like how it plays. Oh, Horizon Forbidden West is looking a lot better now. And this whole episode isn't to say that Horizon Forbidden West is a bad game. Like, I liked Horizon Zero Dawn. I think I might like replay it pretty soon. Definitely considering getting Forbidden West. But it is very apparent that Forbidden West makes a lot of safe AAA moves, and things that get executed in the game are done in a very safe manner, meaning that it is done and stylized in a way that's similar to so many other games. And this is kind of just a general stylistic thing for Sony, and maybe I'm kind of getting a little too outside the bubble here, but like lots of Sony games that we see are presented in very similar ways. And I think we kind of see that best when people put together GIFs of like all the different Sony games, but with like the main character running. It's usually like a very alourate GIF, right? Where you see Spider-Man running, then he jumps, but then he turns into Kratos, right? And like Kratos is about to swing an axe, and then as he's swinging, it turns into Aloy from Horizon. And then as Aloy's about to jump onto the back of a horse, it turns into Nathan Drake from Uncharted. But the thing is like as they're changing all these characters, it doesn't feel like the game is changing. It just, you can literally just feel that the wrapper is changing, but everything underneath that wrapper is the same Werther's original that you had like 8 years ago playing Uncharted 1.
I like the example of that GIF. I generally do want to stay away from targeting specific games, and also, or even like console generations or anything like that. I really would like to stick more with the phenomenology, you know, the player, the first person experience of being someone who is game fatigued, while also getting into the reasons why we find games fatiguing, right? So I understand you're doing that with the latter, right? And just to go back to something that you said earlier, there is a distinction to be made between a person who has played too much games and the game industry that has made too many similar games, right? And both can lead to the sense of fatigue, right? And nobody can have a fully well-rounded life if they only play video games. If you're playing video games for 12 hours a day, you know, it's like summer break and you're 15, you know, that's like, I've done that. It's not a good life to lead. You know, you really should be doing other things. Go move around. Go do some push-ups. Go learn to cook. Like, you know, there need to be multiple aspects of your life that you're working on simultaneously in order for you to reach the fulfillment that, you know, that you seek. And video games are a really great way to kind of relax and rest and kind of like recuperate if you are doing a lot of other work. But if video games are the primary thing that you're working toward, like, you've gotta also have like other hustles, you know, like you're just there's this sense of wanting to like improve oneself or become more well-rounded or even like marketable, if we want to look at it from like a business perspective. I think of it more as like just a human development kind of thing, you know, like we have this like sense of striving in us. And if we eschew that, right, for the sake of the thing that's most comfortable, we're going to like perpetuate our own misery, right? Every day we're going to wake up, we're going to be depressed, and we're going to continue to live the same way. And you got to break that cycle if you're there, right? And that's not the only kind of game fatigue that occurs, though, right? So assuming people have multiple aspects of their life that they're already developing, and they go to play games, and let's say it's like a relatively reasonable number of hours per week. I'm not going to put a number to that because I don't want to be overly normative, but there still is the sense that a person could be fatigued, right? There still is. There are, like Carlos was saying, there are tropes like across genres, across like one publisher's, you know, like library, that feel too similar, right? And it seems to me kind of obvious why seeing the same game multiple times would be fatiguing, right? Imagine if I wanted to read a book and every single time that I read the book, it had the same plot structure, right? I could read 10 different books, but they all, like, the characters were different, but the plots were the same. Or the chapters were, like, it was always 1,200 words before the second chapter started, and the second chapter was always 1,800 words, and then the third chapter was 5,000 words. Wow, how surprising. It was so much longer than the last two chapters. But if all the books that I'm reading are doing that, then by the time I get to the third book, I'm going to be pissed rather than surprised.
Yeah, and that right there is the loss of novelty that you're like describing, right? Everything is just becoming super expected, and rather than, you know, being like, whoa, I didn't know this was a thing, or wow, how delightful, which is like what we often experience and feel like moment to moment in the Mario games and the Kirby games, the Yoshi games. Like lots of Nintendo games really lean on this sort of like exploration, discovery, and like delightment, joy type thing. But yeah, when the books are all doing the same thing, and hell, even when Nintendo is doing the same thing on itself over and over, like it does get boring at some point. So how do things like the hype cycle and just the like ecosystem around gaming, how could that maybe fatigue us? Like we play the games, we've talked about playing the games and the games not being boring, but, you know, giving us fatigue as we're playing them. Is there a possibility that we become fatigued before the game even comes out? Right? Like,
oh my gosh, wow, what a question. That is so cynical. It's like, I don't even need to play this game to feel
I'm kind of thinking that, like, I might have personally experienced this through the Cyberpunk stuff.
I think you can feel fatigue, like, from trailers, certainly, but you can also feel fatigue. Oh, but this is really hard to articulate. You can feel game fatigue from watching trailers, but not feel fatigue for that particular game. It's just the game advertising, like, being advertised over, like, being advertised to over and over again, and if it is game advertisements particularly that you're looking into, just watching ad after ad could really drain you, and you could not remember a single ad that you watched, or you could remember like one of five.
You are just giving me flashbacks to when I went to E3. This is 100% GameCon syndrome. Is like PAX and E3, you know, lines and lines of gamers to play various demos, and while you're in line, all you're hearing are like the loud booming sound systems for the same 2 or 3 ads depending on where you're located in the site, right? Like, oh, I want to try Borderlands, so I'm right next to the ad for fucking South Park and the Stick of Truth and like Borderlands 7 and who knows, Evolve in the background, and you're just hearing those same 3 ads over and over and over for like the hour you're waiting in line to play a 15-minute demo. And by the end of it, dude, I swear, I had like big Final Fantasy swag bags full of just dumb gamer shit that I like wasn't gonna use ever. And I did not remember like 90% of the things that I had like experienced. I would have to like ask my friends, like, what demos did we hang around for? Like, what was that one thing? Because yeah, you're just being like overstimulated, bombarded with this information. Like, even if it's not pertinent to like what you want to know, it's just like, you know, hype, get some Imagine Dragons in there. Here's a couple of gunshots that sync up to the Imagine Dragons song. Oh, and now we're going to tell you like a vague release window. And all of that blends together so quickly because, at least on the hype side of things, like, everybody does their hype the same. That's why my breakdown of the Imagine Dragons trailer is going to describe like 80% of the commercials that come up.
You're raising an interesting point from the perspective of the companies who are trying to market their games. Namely, how do they entice people who already have seen game trailers, right? How can they make their trailer fresh? How can they charm you? You know, how can they compel you to play their game, buy their game, remember their game, right? Without giving away what's in their game that will be fun when you play, right? So it's a really tough balance, because you want there to be, if I buy game X and because the trailer looked really good, and then I take it home and the trailer or the game has nothing that the trailer didn't have, right? If the game is just everything that the trailer showed me it would be and nothing additional, I will be bored. I will be fatigued, potentially, right? I'm more likely to be fatigued. But if the trailer doesn't show me anything that should interest me, then I won't buy the game. So they have to be interesting, but not too interesting that the payoff of the game will not be satisfying, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, they have to give you a lead, basically. Like, don't reveal all the secrets and mechanics of the game, but give just enough for people to be like, oh, I want to spend money to see what the rest of this is alluding to.
Right, yeah. They got that hook.
Yeah. Which, in my opinion, it's a lost art in the movie world. Too many movie trailers just giving away all the good bits or anything important. Thankfully, we don't really have that in video games, at least not yet.
It's easier to spoil a movie than to spoil a game. You can spoil the story of a game, but you have to play a game in order to feel it. You know, you have to know what the difference, the latency is when you press jump, and like, you know, or like you need to see how long your character can hover before, you know, like there's so much game feel that goes into, you know.
Yeah, and just knowing what interactions you have and what mechanics are present, right? Like, you can know what genre something's in, but you don't know exactly what mechanics are present. And that's kind of where I lie more so on spoilers, right? It's like, if I don't want to know about a game, I am like sold on the premise. Maybe I saw like a tiny bit of like mechanics, but from there, like, I want it to be a surprise box. Like, I don't want to know that Kirby has mouthful mode. I don't want to know that, like, Scorpion from Mortal Kombat has a new special chain in this version. I just want to know Scorpion's in it, and Mortal Kombat's still Mortal Kombat. Okay, cool. Like, let me discover this stuff and have those ooh-ah moments as I'm playing. Because that's, like, what really helps, at least for me, to fight fatigue, is, like, keeping things secret in order to have that novelty when it shows up, right? And I do this for movies to a fair extent as well, because I want to like go into the theater or load it up on my streaming box and say like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting this. Whereas like, you know, half of my friends are like, bro, that was in like the first trailer they put out. And I'm like, that's great. I'm so glad I didn't watch that trailer, because this was such a nice surprise. And like, just that for video games, where it's like, oh, Horizon Forbidden West, like, I know I'm gonna fight dinosaurs, I know there's gonna be some platforming, okay, I'm in for that. Don't tell me anything else. Like, don't tell me there's gonna be a grenade launcher or some sort of like hunting animal type aspect, because I am just gonna be along for the ride at that point, right? That's why I try to avoid the hype train. Long story short, is like, I want to keep those games as surprising as possible.
Yeah, you're saying there's a selfish reason to avoid the hype train.
Yeah.
You want things to be preserved for you, you know, kind of in their original state. And like, in some sense, if they're not penetrating your mind, if the advertisements are not getting through, then you're able to go in blind and like experience the game for what it is, and kind of like how it really ultimately should be experienced, right? If we can make such a claim that there is a right way to play a game, often going into a piece of media without any prior knowledge is a really like almost like the most authentic connection you can have to that media, because you're not in the zeitgeist, the marketing BS bubble, you know?
Yeah. And you don't necessarily have that built communication. That's something that I think about a lot on the design side, is like, people who don't play video games, right? If they approach my game, will they inherently understand it? Can my game elegantly explain itself and like how to engage with it to a player who's new? And this kind of like goes back to a conversation we had at some point about like tutorials and like having to relearn how to play a game, even though, you know, we play games like all the time. Why do we have to relearn it? But we have to think about the one player who like has never played a game, and can this game actually like, you know, communicate with them and they can figure it out. Like, I think what you said is right. It's not that it is the best way. To some extent, it's kind of like it's the purest way to play a game, I guess, right? It's similar to maybe Tunic. I mean, to bring up something that we're playing more recently, like if you don't know how to play games, or if you haven't played games in so long, and then you come into like a AAA game or something like that, it's still this kind of experience where a game is speaking a different language to you, one that you have not read or seen before, and you sort of have to piece together, like, why is there bird shit on this ledge? Like, why is there bird shit everywhere on these ledges in the world? Why is it that they put like these weird yellow and black hazard stripes on certain things? I guess that means I should stay away because they're building off of like human intuition, as opposed to maybe past video games that have said like, no, this is big and yellow. Like, we want you to grab onto this. What about outside of games though? Like, do you have fatigue happening when you're not playing a game? Like we've said it already, like, yeah, okay, watching the hype train and stuff, but let's just say you're going to the mall, right? GameStop's not there. You're just going to the mall to pick up some khakis, and some kid walks by with an Among Us shirt. Like, does that trigger you? Are you like, I'm so fucking tired of Among Us. I just played 13 hours. I got off the game. I'm sick of Among Us. And then some little kid walks by and his shirt says Amogus and has like the little blue guy on it or whatever. Like, are you extra fatigued by that?
Among Us is an interesting example. I definitely felt fatigued by Among Us. I mean, considering I played it, only a few times. Like probably all together I've played less than 10 rounds of Among Us, but I saw it everywhere, right? Like you're saying, like it was on t-shirts, and also just people who didn't play games were talking about it. And it just seemed to be this like kind of like this like cultural moment, you know, kind of like Animal Crossing, which I have similar feelings about, where it's like I don't really ever want to sit down and play Animal Crossing myself. It's not my kind of game. Among Us is not my kind of like I like the werewolf card game. Like I played that as like a teenager, like way more, or like Mafia is like another version where like the character roles are just different, but I believe that those card games are essentially the same thing, where it's like asymmetric gameplay. One person is like bad, and then the other people have to try to bust the person who's bad. Is essentially the format of those kinds of games. It's a format I'm familiar with, but like I didn't feel like Among Us did something spectacular. You know, I think the fact that it was around for several years before it went viral is interesting. I mean, it kind of on some level shows I don't know, there are a lot of lessons that we could learn or extract from that, but I don't want to get into that. I just like I'll drop that. But even something like more recently I saw like a Sonic 2 billboard. And it's like I'm driving around right now. Like I don't need this. I don't need to be inundated with the game stuff. You know, I think about games enough. Like I don't need to see you, Sonic. Like go away. You know. And even though I think Tails was the one on the trailer, and Tails is my favorite character in the Sonic universe, but still, I was like, get the hell out of here. Like I don't need this. You know.
Yeah, so we want our gaming like in gaming appropriate areas, which I feel kind of similarly about like maybe a bunch of different billboard type advertisements or whatever. But yeah, definitely after living in LA for a while too, like I became so hyper aware of the amount of advertising happening to me in the real world, like every few feet. It's definitely a lot better now, but I totally feel you on like okay, I am not gonna watch Sonic the Hedgehog 2, you know, just for sake of example. Like, I don't need 5 back-to-back posters of it on my sidewalk on the way to 7-Eleven. Or, you know, I am not interested in the Academy Awards, so why the fuck am I seeing billboards up? That's all just for your consideration. Like, I don't want to watch any of these, right? But their hope is that, I don't know, some Academy judge sees it and like is like, oh, you know what, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, I have been sleeping on that, I guess I'll check it out. And then Jim Carrey's like on stage winning an award and giving some existential speech. But getting back to the main D-pad at point, right? games or hints of games outside of the gaming space can lead to us like just being fatigued of the idea, not having the experience of the sort of like glazed eyes and like super mushy mind sort of feel. That's the actual like game fatigue. But this is more of like, oh, the idea of this game, like I'm sick of it now because I've just seen it too much. It's been talked about too much. Like I would have been interested in maybe trying this game out if I hadn't heard 18,000 people at different instances in the last week all tell me, wow, this game is really good. You should try it. Wow. And we see that extend to other things like, let's say, Squid Game or like anything, let's say Game of Thrones as well. Any sort of like big media that's like part of like a growing zeitgeist or scene. There are those who are like, okay, well, you guys have talked enough about this that it's annoying to me now. I don't want to engage with it at all. But I feel like it takes a lot more for that to happen.
I don't want it to come across like I or we or like this, like have this like hipster attitude where like if it gets popular, then we're done with it, right? It's not like we don't like it because it seems uncool now that other people are interested in it. It has to do with the fact that it's like kind of like oversaturating my mind space. I don't have a willingness to play something that I'm forced to engage with all the time, even when I'm not playing it. Knowing that a million people are playing Among Us because there are a bunch of memes about it, because my cousin who never plays video games is talking about it, you know, whatever the case may be, I'm getting all of that is investment that I'm doing like really without much choice. And there's no return on investment because it's like, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with someone about gaming when they don't know anything about gaming. They don't have any pieces of media to compare this to. We're not really going to be able to have an intellectual conversation about the nature of gaming based on this person's experience, but they're excited that they're playing it and they want to talk about it, you know? And it's like, I'm willing to have that conversation. Like, I'm happy this person is having a good time. But in my free time, I am not I'm less interested, you know? It will take more. This game will have to do more for me in order to get me to, again, be charmed. You know, like to be enchanted, to like fall for this game in that sense. You know, it's like it's already here. Like I already know about it. I'm already dealing with it. You know, it's like, why would I then download it and play it? You know, because someone asks me, and that's really the only situations I've been in where I've played Among Us are like invitation based. I'm never going to invite people to play Among Us. I think it's. Enough people have played Among Us. We're good. Like, we can play a different game now, y'all.
So how long does it take us to become fatigued? Specifically that feeling of the in-game, like, I am actively playing the game and I'm feeling fatigued by this now. Like, how long does it take for us to get there?
That depends on so many factors, and we've touched on some of these factors earlier. We talked about, you know, whether or not you have a well-rounded life, whether or not you're playing, you know, things besides video games. We've talked about the amount that one person can stand to be advertised to. We've talked about like cultural fads, like with the Animal Crossing and the Among Us. Mm-hmm. But I know that for me, there are like mechanics, or there are things that trigger me to feel fatigue. And I think that would be the best way that I could go about answering this question. Just take it from a personal experience rather than try to generalize.
Yeah.
But things that like kind of interrupt like mechanics, things that disrupt the flow of the game for me. So like I'm talking about like dense story with like lots of reading or long cutscenes. Even things like not having a sprint button or like a character that's just like moving too slow. Like all of those I view as preventing me from having the optimal relationship with the character. You know, like I want to be able to navigate this world as quickly as possible, as joyously as possible. And if I'm being bogged down by either mechanics that are not fast paced enough for my interest, or by bad storytelling, or storytelling that would better be in a book or in a movie rather than a game, you know, I want the storytelling to primarily be mechanical, you know, to be intertwined with the mechanics in a game. I think that's really where the most important storytelling in games lies, because otherwise it would be in a different media. So if it's failing to do that, you know, that kind of vision that I'm putting on gaming, I would say those are the kinds of things that are most likely to fatigue me. How do you want to answer this question? Do you want to go personally? Do you want to talk about in general what you think people are fatigued by?
I will go personally and then maybe take a layer to see what we can call as general fatigues.
Hit me. What do you find fatiguing, man?
For me, what I find fatiguing is very similar mechanics. It's going to tie in a lot to just novelty in general. But if I have experienced like very similar mechanics to something else, and these aren't mechanics that I find especially juicy, then I am going to get tired of playing your game more quickly. For example, if a game has action reload from Gears of War, right? It's not going to inherently make that game fun for me. Like there's a VR game I was playing recently where like everything in it was very lackluster to me, but I was cutting it some slack because I enjoyed the active reload. But definitely much sooner than later, I was just so tired of that game and kind of just like forcing myself to play it rather than actually like choosing to go in and play it. So very similar mechanics. It's not a guarantee that like, ooh, I saw this in Gears of War and it's done very similarly, like this is going to be fun. But if it's something like, oh, this is the movement and grinding and tricking system from Jet Set Radio, but now it's in like a completely different environment or something like that, that I could see being a lot less fatiguing. Like that's a very cool system that we also don't see often, I guess is the bigger point there, right? Like the Devil May Cry style system where you're trying to get combos to build up from an F rank combo to like triple S ranks. Like we don't see that super often. So when we do get to see that recreated in a well executed way in a different game, that presents a similar mechanic, but it is still a fairly new novelty. So for me, very similar mechanics, just sort of like being used for the heck of it, or, you know, not innovating on how that mechanic's been used before, as well as extended no novelty time. So like you mentioned the long cutscenes. For me, it's like going 30 to 60 plus minutes without having anything new introduced to the game. And this doesn't mean simply, oh, a new mechanic, a new gun, a new ability is introduced to you. It's like, hey, like, why don't we go to a different setting? Why don't we have different enemies that appear? You know, enemies with different abilities, or they could be enemies that just like really look different. Like if it was like, oh, I'm facing humanoid enemies this entire time, now suddenly they're monstrous creatures that don't even really have a human form. That's like an interesting mix up to things. If I don't have any sort of mix up for a long time, then I definitely start to get tired of a game. I think boredom might come before fatigue, you know, now that we talk about this, because when I get no novelty time for too long, I do start to get bored of a game. And if I push myself to play the game while being bored, it starts to negatively impact. And I think that's where the fatigue comes in. It's like the more sunken costs that I'm like putting into this, the more I'm thinking like, oh, maybe a new mechanic is going to come right down the road. Maybe if I just play another 30 minutes or clear another hideout, I'll unlock a really cool thing. And that's where I think the fatigue starts to really come in, is like, oh, this isn't like performing the way I want it to, but I'm going to give it a little more chance. And slowly realizing that that chance like wasn't actually worth it. It kind of burns both the game and myself. So those are my personal factors. Just like lots of similar mechanics with no innovation and just extended periods of no novelty, nothing new being introduced to spice up the game. I think that latter half is sort of the general note on like a lot of games that can become fatiguing. And that's kind of like tough to speak on a little bit because, you know, there are so many players out there that like love themselves some Madden or some FIFA and even Call of Duty in general. And like those games don't seem to like heavily innovate or introduce new novelties like between matches and things like that.
I would love to talk about that, like a full episode about that exact topic, like the games that the iteration on them is the year.
Yes, stagnant
or
games.
Like the jersey. Yeah, stagnant games. Yes. Ooh, that's such a good title. Damn, look at you.
Yeah, shit, Madden's been in stagnation for like a decade, maybe more.
Yeah, like personally, I've been trying to like workshop, you know, this in my mind, you know, for a few months. It's like I was originally thinking that there were two poles to a game for me, right? And that would be that the game is either doing something new. There's something new about this game that I really can't get elsewhere, or I could get it in an equivalent type of game, and then at that point it's just about like kind of a matter of taste, right? If like there are two new features that were simultaneously created. The second thing is, so we got novelty. The second thing is a better version of something that I've already enjoyed in the past, right? So like iterating, like it's like you want games to continue to improve. The developers of game A influenced the developers of game B, and game B made like a superior version to A, or not even, but maybe like that specific mechanic or that particular aspect of it was superior. They could be two completely different games. So originally those were the two things I was thinking, and then now I'm thinking that the third one I want to throw in there is also like historical. There are historical reasons for playing games. So you could play Mario 64. Like let's say you're 16 right now. When you were a kid, Mario 64. By the time you were born, Mario 64 had already come out. I suppose we could say, right? That there are better Mario games to play, but going back and playing Mario 64 and seeing what it was like at that era, there's something beneficial about that, right? You get a better understanding for games overall by engaging with that text. So as of right now, those are the three reasons why I personally think that I play games. There may be others out there, but I don't know. That's kind of a fun exercise. But if assuming one of those conditions is met, I think I'm not going to be fatigued. I might find myself bored at a moment. I might need to set breaks and stop playing for a little bit. But if one of those things is happening and I'm actively engaging with that, mentally, then I don't see how I could be fatigued.
Could genres in general become fatiguing? Like taking the scope off of specific games, do you think like genres as a whole? I do recall us recording something about roguelike fatigue. I know I have definitely experienced that. I think you probably experienced that at some point. And that seemed to be a case of very similar mechanics without iteration on them between titles. Or maybe just the formula as a whole hasn't been iterated on enough to like keep us going on that. But does that mean that like roguelikes in general fatigue us, or do we come back to it at some point, right? Like, does the FPS genre, is that entirely fatiguing? I would personally say no, because occasionally we get something that is like very innovative. Like Portal is a first-person shooter for sure, but it's a puzzle game and you're using portals, right? You could potentially take What Remains of Edith Finch. Even though you're not shooting, it is very much like a first-person perspective game, and you're like going. That's like
it's like a walking sim.
Kind of. It's definitely like a bit of a stretch to say like Edith Finch is a first-person shooter, because it's obviously missing the shooting aspect of it.
There's no shooting at all. There's nothing remotely close to shooting in that game.
But there is something there where it's like, is the genre itself like fatigued? I usually lean on the side of no, because when we start to hit boredom in a genre, we start to see a lot of innovation. And at least nowadays, it seems to usually come heavily from the indie developers. And then whichever indie developer hits it big, then the corpos will try to recreate that mechanic or whatever X factor like revitalized that genre.
Yeah, I mean, there is the aspect that like corporations are going to do what they think will make them the most money, and if they see that roguelikes are really successful, then they're going to make roguelikes, right? Or if they see FPS games are really successful, so they put a lot of resources into that because they assume that people are going to continue to buy those. But there's the effect of us running ourselves into the ground. If I'm searching for roguelikes, regardless of their popularity, if I'm going to try to play as many roguelikes as I possibly can, even if the world, is not as obsessed, or even if the culture is not as obsessed with roguelikes as I am, right? If there are only 10 roguelikes and I play all of them, I will run myself into the ground and I will be personally fatigued. But that was kind of something I did to myself, right? There are obviously way more than 10 roguelikes now. And I have personally felt fatigue from roguelikes, but I also do think that they are currently my favorite genre. Part of the problem with that is that they're not really, there's not a lot of explanation about what that genre is in terms of like what the gameplay will be like. In the sense that you don't know if it's going to be a like 2D side-scrolling platformer or like a 3D first person shooter, right? Like that, like, so there are a lot of there's a lot of variation, that like within, or like even isometric shit, I mean, it's like there's so many different styles of like perspective and combat, and like even ones without combat probably, and I talked about Boyfriend Dungeon like a couple weeks ago, and that's a roguelike, and we recorded Roguelike Fatigue like maybe like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I don't even know, but you can be revitalized once you have that novelty again, or just by putting it down for a while. It's like, I'm not going to play roguelikes for like 3 months, and then I can come back to them, and I'm kind of like, I have more tolerance for them again. It's like a tea break for your video games.
Yeah, and those especially need to happen with these like more live servicey games. Like when you talk about roguelikes, for me, a big part of the fatiguing aspect is like this sense of like, well, I'm not really getting any further. Like, sure, you're clearing out the levels and rooms and whatever, but like, it's sort of this endless game. So it eventually feels kind of like futile in a way. And I'm like, I need to take a break. Like, and then maybe I'll come back and do a couple runs on like something.
And the other side of that is that it's easy to pop in and pop out of. Like that's the benefit. One of the benefits that roguelikes have, where it's like you can just do one run, and it's like a finite ending. Like other games, it's like you can just play them until you beat them. But a roguelike, you can just do a run. And it's like a good session. Like it's kind of a built-in time index component, kind of like how some games, I think Nintendo primarily are like an Overcooked, where you're like kind of traveling around a map, and then you'll jump in a world, and then you could finish that level, right? But once you're finished with that level, like you don't necessarily want to stop. There is no obvious break point, but when you die in a roguelike, like all game stops, you restart at the very beginning, and at some point you're just not going to want to do that again, so you kind of, it forces you to put the game down in that sense.
So something else I want to bring up in general with the fatigue aspect is the bandwagoning and general trend chasing of game industry stuffs. We saw this happen with battle royales, right? Where like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds really blew up. It's a first-person shooter, has like a third-person option. Oh, and now it's like 99 people falling onto a map. Oh my God, we need all these games to do this, right? And we saw like multiple Call of Duty games start to put Battle Royale into their title. We saw games as weird as Tetris and Pac-Man and Mario implement these Battle Royale style modes, but they weren't Battle Royale in the sense of like everybody goes into the map and they try to kill each other, first person shooter, third person shooter style. We saw it more so like everybody has their game board and they're working together to do whatever and, knock people out. So like definitely Battle Royale in general got like super quickly milked by the industry, but it also just as quickly began breeding innovation within the idea of a battle royale, going from first-person shooter to now, like, how do we make Pac-Man work as a BR? How do we make Tetris work as a BR? How do we make Marble Blast Ultra work as a BR? That type of thing. So that's really cool, but at the same time, like, can we actually appreciate the innovation when the fatigue is already like present and came in so fast? The other example for like a trend that might get fatigued like rapidly will probably be this like werewolf Among Us style of game, right? Like Among Us came out during pandemic. Among Us like got very popular among streamers and things like that, and then a couple months go by and all of a sudden Fortnite has its own Among Us mode, and you see like more Among Us style games being featured on like PlayStation State of Plays and whatever else. So like we have this obvious like genre of game that's like coming up more and more. Some games are using it as like their whole game, right? And you have some games like Fortnite which are just using it as like an extra mode. But like, is that the next thing that's going to get fatigued? Is it already fatigued? I don't know, because like I don't really play much of these games that are featuring an Among Us mode, but it definitely seems like the bandwagoning, everybody just thinking like, oh no, there's money on the table, the boogeyman, money on the table, like we can't let it just sit on the table, it's going to burn if it's on the table. Like everybody chasing for that quote unquote money is just like expediting the fatigue process, as well as surprisingly the innovative process.
I think one of the problems with this kind of innovation is that it's a little sloppy and it's not truly inspired, in the sense that it's more like replicating a trend, or it's like if I'm in charge of a studio that works on Tetris and I'm tasked with creating a new innovative Tetris game, and then everybody is playing a battle royale or everybody's making a battle royale, obviously I'm going to think a battle royale. Like, nobody is like super impressed that someone came up with the idea of a Tetris battle royale, and the execution was fun. Like, I like Tetris 99, but in general, once Nintendo has multiple, like first party battle royales, my relationship with them is to play them very briefly, understand the novelty, and then let them go. Like, I don't want to feel fatigued from the Mario. It wasn't Mario 99, right? It was like Mario 31 or something like that, but it was the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And, I played it, like for a couple of days, and then I was like, okay, I got a feel for this. Like, I understand what this game is. But I wasn't excited by it. I wasn't like gripped by it, When it was first released, when it was first the trailer, I was really excited for the trailer. But by the time it came out, I don't know if I just played too many battle royales at that point, but it didn't feel as special to me as I was expecting or something. I mean, maybe that's something to be said for fatigue in general, is that a sense of disappointment, like with, the hype cycle that we've talked about in the past, and with the fact that developers or publishers are trying to get you on the hook, right? It's very easy to get off that hook if the game, for some reason, doesn't live up to your expectations. And maybe your expectations were set too high, and that could be your fault or the publisher's fault. But if it's not meeting that bar, that sense of disappointment, it makes you feel like it was like a sunk cost. All this excitement that you had was for nothing, and it's like, well, now what do I do? Do I continue playing this game that I was really excited for, that I spent all this money on, or do I let it go and play something that will actually give me some form of enjoyment or novelty that I didn't get from this game?
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about how the genre was kind of like reshaped to fit the game, as opposed to like the genre being rethought to actually like improve the genre. And that's part of the trend chasing thing, right? It's like, and let's say I want to make a Tetris that's popular because it's Tetris and it's the best parts of Tetris accentuated and put up front, versus I want to make Tetris popular by using a thing that's like already popular and seeing how Tetris can like live within that box. And those two end products we have from the two processes that I talked about are the Tetris Effect and Tetris 99. And granted, Tetris Effect wasn't going for any sort of battle royale thing, but it was like, if you think of it from a more abstract, maybe philosophy type of side, Tetris Effect is very much like, this is a celebration of Tetris. This is going to lean into like everything Tetris does and could do and like make it cool and interesting.
And immersive, the most immersive Tetris experience. We recommend that you play with headphones.
So like full Tetris, right? And then you have Tetris 99, which is very much like, okay, this is like bare bones Tetris, but we managed to like work in this game mode into it. It's not like innovation to the game mode. It is just, here is the game mode of Tetris within the game mode of Battle Royale. And there maybe isn't like a really good marriage of like ideas happening there. There's not a good melding of mechanics and presentation, something like that. So to circle back to kind of like my main point, I'm saying that like, it seems like for you especially, like there needs to be a innovation and like a harmony if like you are going to try to like mash this game into this genre or something like that.
Yeah.
Similar to like the Werther's original example, I guess. It's like you can taste the Werther's, like even though they're putting a different Tetris wrapper on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're developing a game and you decide, like, I want it to be part of this, like, I want it to fit in with all these other games that came out within the last 5 years, I feel like you're kind of doing a disservice to that game because you're playing a comparison game. And often that's dictated by, like, what the market demands, right? But it doesn't feel like you're having, if you make a Pac-Man Battle Royale, I don't know that you loved the idea of a Pac-Man Battle Royale as much as you thought a Pac-Man Battle Royale would sell. Is that the best possible way to feel and play Pac-Man? Was Pac-Man always like kind of Pac-Man demands Battle Royale? We just didn't have we had hardware limitations that didn't allow us. No, I mean, I don't think before a Pac-Man Battle Royale came out, like, there wasn't this massive wave of people demanding Pac-Man Battle Royales. They were like, if I could have had Pac-Man Battle Royale in the 80s, my life would have been perfect. You know, like I just don't feel like that's a thing. It doesn't seem to like really mesh with what it seems opportunistic, I guess. Like, that's my bottom line. I feel like I'm being scammed a little bit. My attention is being scammed. It's like Pac-Man is cool and retro, and battle royales are trendy, and you know, like they're in fashion right now. So you should want both of these things, and I don't need that. I think I did play that game, but I have no like vivid memories of that, you know. And I think that kind of speaks to my point of like how quickly it's fatiguing. You know what I'm saying? Am I making sense? I feel like I'm like just trailing off, and I don't know. I'm fatigued by this conversation, damn it. I'm fatigued about talking about fatigue. If you're a frequent listener, you know that we have been rotating our third segment. We're just experimenting a little bit, trying to figure out what works for us and what works for y'all. And the new segment that we bring you this week is This Day in Gaming History. The intention for this is to explore the day that the podcast is going to be released. We've planned in advance what day the podcast will be released, and we will assess what happened on that day. Either one or two notable events that happened on that day. The day in question, the day this podcast will be released, whether you're listening to it on this day or not, is May 31st. Say happy May, Carlos. Like, let me hear something from you. What do you want to say about May 31st? What brings you joy about May 31st?
May 31st marks us basically going into summer, and that's all I can be happy for. Love me some summer times. I want to get there sooner than later. But what has happened through so many years of gaming history on specifically May 31st? What can we call out that has happened as like an important point in gaming history for the day of May 31st? 23
years ago, which is May 31st, 1999, Superman 64 was released.
Oh my goodness.
Superman 64. Carlos, you play this game?
Yes. I remember renting Superman 64 once or twice from my local, I don't know, Hollywood Video or whatever they were called at the time. And it was not fun. It was not a good experience.
Yes, this is a notoriously terrible game.
One of the worst reviewed games ever. Like, if you go to Metacritic, if you go to IGN, wherever you go, like, this is going to be on people's shit list.
Man, is it always the licensed games that come out so much worse? It's like there's so much hope for them, and like, you know, you have to communicate with the company that you're licensing from, and oh man, yeah. But this game basically just like, I recommend checking out some footage of this game. It is I guess hilarious is like in a word. You're just flying through rings, but it looks so clunky, and they make you restart in this game so frequently. Like, as soon as you fail a challenge, you know, they really require a level of perfection that nobody can attain, you know? How old were you when you played this? You remember?
Oh, man. I think I was probably 10 years old or less, honestly. Like, it was very early on. And when you talk about the perfection, like, yeah, at times it feels like almost one of those, like, runner-style games, where it's like, oh, I need to like jump and slide at the specific beats of the music in order to like pass the whole level. Otherwise, I'm playing the entire level from the start. That's definitely how some of the segments of Superman 64 felt. I remember just very much struggling with flying, and that's what so much of that game is flying. But like, more so than struggling with flying was just learning how to like interact with the world or yourself. Meaning, when I need to go from flying to like just standing on the floor to like beat up a bad guy, I can't even understand like what button I need to press. It's not something simple where I just like fly to the ground and he naturally senses ground is nearby and just like is stepping, right? And if there's a car getting ready to hit like a baby in a stroller, nothing in the game has really told me how to like pick up the car. Is there a bad guy in the car? Should I just punch the car to death and then you get a game over because there was an innocent man who was looking for his glasses in that car, and Superman doesn't kill innocent people, so fly through the rings again. It was just not fun. And like the later levels just become like these indoor mazes of just nonsense.
Yeah, you're bringing up something that, to tie back to our earlier segments, you're talking about confusion and also frustration, I suppose. And I think those are also things that can lead to fatigue.
On this day in gaming history, a game that no one should play came out. More at 11, Tom.
What Superman movie was that? Was it tied to a specific one?
This was tied to the WB Kids Superman TV show that eventually became like Batman and Superman. I think it was just called The Adventures of Superman. In the game, Lex Luthor has trapped Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, and Professor Hamilton in a virtual reality version of Metropolis that he created with the help of Brainiac, leaving it up to Superman to save them and break apart the virtual world. So Superman has to go into VR where he somehow still has all of his Superman powers because they built that for him. This is so weird as a VR developer.
Well, I mean, it's like they're talking about VR like so many years before there was even like a working model, you know?
Well, this is 99, so the Virtual Boy had come out, but like even then, right, like VR was just like not actually VR. So in either case, like my brain is slowly breaking from like thinking about like how they thought VR would work and like try to tie it into the story or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brainiac creates VR, Superman goes into VR, and that's why all the rings are present. And maybe that is why Superman doesn't know how to do shit. You know what I mean? Like when Superman gets close to the ground, maybe that's why he doesn't understand how does he walk, because he's like, this virtual reality world doesn't work like mine. Help me.
Yeah, it's funny that there's like their narrative tie-in, you know? It's like, oh, I was being deceived the whole time. No wonder this game sucked. No wonder I didn't know what I was doing. You know, it's like, it was intentionally clunky. That wasn't a bug.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you for listening to Deep in the Deep Pad. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share us with your friends.
For updates and discussion, follow us on Reddit at r/deepinthedpad, Facebook at deepdpad, and subscribe to Deep in the D-Pad on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the bell.
And if you want to ask us questions or you had a chance to share your own D-Pad delight on the show, email us at askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com. Be sure to put question or delight in the subject line.
Big thanks to 8-Bit Jazz and Kevin MacLeod for supplying the music for the show.